Welcome back to a special deeper dive presentation of the Modjeska Simkins School of Human Rights. I am Dr. Robert Green II, the lead instructor for the school. And today I am pleased, humbled, and honored to welcome our special guest for this afternoon, Dr. Fergus Bordewich. Now, Dr. Bordewich has written numerous books on American history. Today, of course, we are here to discuss his newest work, Klan War, Ulysses S. Grant, and the Battle to Save Reconstruction. But he's also written numerous other books about American history, including Congress at War, How Republican Reformers Fought the Civil War, Defied Lincoln, Ended Slavery, and Remade America. That's quite a title. Also, First Congress, How James Madison, George Washington, and a group of extraordinary men invented the government, amongst other books. But today we are here to discuss his newest work, Klan War, which has, of course, a lot of relevance and significance, not only in terms of how it talks about the Reconstruction era, but also how the laws created by the Grant administration still impact us today in the 21st century. So without further ado, let's give Dr. Fergus Bordewich a big Modjeska School welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everybody, both those of you who are here and those of you who are out there somewhere in the ether whom I don't see. I really appreciate being invited down. I got to know something about the school from my good friend Vernon Burton, who I think is well known here.
Well known.
I've known for quite a number of years and is just a wonderful historian, as you well know. So I'm primarily going to be talking, as you gather, about Ulysses Grant's war against the Ku Klux Klan in the 1870s. Before I really dig into that, let me just say a few words by way of a setup and a background about kind of South Carolina as a context for this. South Carolina was an epicenter, you may not be surprised to hear, of the Klan War and of Ku Klux Klan organization. I mean, the roots of South Carolina's political behavior and social behavior during Reconstruction go back much further. I mean, South Carolina is one of these unusual states that has a kind of almost sometimes an autonomous history in the United States, but not to go too far afield. Suffice it to say that while there were 11 states in the Confederacy, South Carolina, 11 slave states that became the Confederacy, slavery was embedded arguably more deeply in South Carolina than any other state, even in the South. Why was that? Charleston, as you all know, surely was a major port in the slave trade. Trading in slaves was a pillar of the state's economy. There were more enslaved people in South Carolina before the Civil War than there were free people, and so on. The man who's really, seems to me, the kind of dark guiding spirit of South Carolina before the Civil War, familiar name to you, John C. Calhoun. No big surprise, that's what I'm talking about. I wanted to refer to something in one of my earlier books here, where, just so you know what it is, this is a book I wrote about the Compromise of 1850. Not in most people's minds one of the sexiest pieces of American history, but we almost had the Civil War in 1850, and this is a book about why that was and why it didn't happen then. But Calhoun was still alive at his last gasp, so to speak. Calhoun, as you probably, secession movement, and the idea of Southern autonomy, and an apostle of slavery. You know, I mean, we have today in antebellum America, it wasn't seen particularly in moral terms until the embryonic abolitionist movement began to gain some ground. It was seen as a matter of business. And Calhoun argued, and he argued this publicly. All these attitudes that he espoused were perfectly respectable before the Civil War. Slavery wasn't evil, but that it was the foundation of American democracy. Sounds like a contradiction in terms, but of course he's talking about American democracy being democracy for wealthy white people. Underscore wealthy, because he wasn't interested really in democracy for working white people either. And that it was a divinely inspired institution that enabled the South's best men to engage in politics. I mean, I know this seems to many people a system so turned on its head, it's hard to take on board. But this is one of the most influential thinkers in America. And I personally, I think John Calhoun influence continues today as an underpinning for attitudes about states' rights that we see re-emerging in our current time. But he was fundamentally anti-democratic. He didn't believe in what we know to be democracy. He didn't even really believe in representative government. He believed in government by the best men, and those best men were, at least here in South Carolina, slave owners. Bigger the better, more slaves the better. He ridiculed the idea that the Supreme Court even had the power to interpret the Constitution. And he would have preferred to replace popular democracy with some form of government that assigned power to elite interest groups. This is all he's written about. He's a very interesting writer, kind of boring as a writer, not as a thinker, but one of the very, very few real intellectuals to have been had profound public influence in American politics. Very rare. It's very rare, and he was a reactionary. He was a reactionary. Think of, maybe we do, maybe we don't think of people with a good intellectual background. We want more of them in politics that have a broader, more enlightened notion of what government can do and society can do. He was a reactionary intellectual. I mean, he defined reactionary. And he proposed the formation, 1847, of a new Southern political party founded on 4 principles. And I'm telling you this because it's long lasting and has a continuing influence, and leads kind of directly in a straight line to the Civil War. A Southern party founded on principles that new territories had to be clearly declared, that property for the South to have an that Congress be denied the right to enact any law or undertake any equal right in any United States territory. That means take slaves anywhere. Slave law barring the citizens of any state from carrying their property, he's talking about slaves, into any territory was a violation of the Constitution, and that people have the unconditional right to adopt the government which they may think best calculated to secure their liberty, prosperity, and happiness. That means to own slaves. Liberty, prosperity, and happiness. And this is taken together. It's an invitation to secession, which he was talking about in some as early as the 1830s. Okay. And as I implied a little while ago, in 1849 and 1850, there was a secession movement. there was a secession movement. It was fended off. I'm not going to go into that because it's kind of, it takes us into other territory by activity in Congress. Okay. Calhoun and his like-minded people, his heir was Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis stood up in 1850 and said, I am prepared to become the president of a new confederacy if you invite me. Calhoun, by the way, there were medals struck in South Carolina in 1832, declaring him the first president of the Southern Confederacy. 1832, 30 years. Anyway, so South Carolina is an intellectual epicenter of secession, of what becomes the war. It matters way beyond its numbers. It's a small state. It counts as a small state in terms of population, but an extremely influential one within the South. And as you probably know better than I, South Carolinians populated and seeded the states further to the west in the South: Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, including even Texas. And so one has to be clear about the fact that South Carolina was a seedbed of some of the most reactionary politics and politicians that this country has produced. Okay. I have the suspicion a lot of this isn't really news to you, but
Mortifying nonetheless.
but
Shining lights on old information from new angle.
but at any rate, so when I get to talking in a few minutes about Klan activity in South Carolina, it's coming out of this nursery that already exists. Okay, I'm going to. You've had people talk to you in detail about the war itself in South Carolina and about Reconstruction. So I'm just going to. I'm not even going to delve into that, except to again.
Fergus, you can highlight the pivotal points because we have more than the students here on Sundays. The general public's invited, and I see a few names that haven't been with us in the class.
Okay.
Year. So
Okay.
without getting into great detail, some of the pivotal points that would help understand the problem.
Okay. Well, of course, I in a very cursory fashion brought you up through the 1830s, 1850, and so on. The decade of the 1850s is a decade of increasing sense of crisis in the United States, as attitudes like the ones that I just outlined coming out of Calhoun and his heirs, Jefferson Davis and others, are colliding with finally a not just a radical abolitionist movement, which almost from the beginning is a biracial movement. It includes both Black and white components. But it becomes increasingly confrontational. And one of the most iconic events of that confrontation was understood that way at the time too. Took place on the floor of the U.S. Congress. You all know about it. I think the caning of Senator Charles Sumner by Congressman Preston Brooks from Edgefield, down the road here. Edgefield, as my I think someone down there said to me, well, I'll explain Edgefield to you. It's the South, the South. It's South Carolina, South Carolina. Very interesting town. I must say, I've done research in Edgefield. It's really interesting. It's like sort of like visiting another country, actually. But be that. Charles Sumner, as you probably are. Sumner is the one in Congress, a silver-tongued orator, not that effective as a legislator, I have to say, but his speeches against slavery were all over the North, and they were banned in the South. But at any rate, he speech in 18 May of 1856, I think. Were particularly prickly when it came to their ideas of honor. I mean, they weren't very inhibited about insulting anyone else, but they took it pretty personally if you said something they didn't care for. And his relative, Preston Brooks, whom you see on top with his famous cane, burst onto the floor of the US Senate and beat Sumner to the ground until Sumner suffered some degree of brain damage. He was unable to serve for close to 2 years actually, but Massachusetts kept him in office. And this is one of the great iconic images of the 1850s. You know that there is a guerrilla war in the state of, well, it becomes the state of Kansas over whether or not it'll become slave territory. There's debate over whether or not slavery can be carried westward or not. There are political battles. There are the Underground Railroad, which I've written about at some length in other books, has become very dynamic and you think of the Underground Railroad. By the way, this map is used by the Park Service and so on. And I'm going to be honest with you, this map is almost useless. And I'm going to tell you why in a word or two. I mean, it gives you a concept, but the truth is that extremely few enslaved people escaped from anywhere in the Deep South. Almost none. Some did, but nothing like these big red arrows that you see here. I mean, nothing like that. The vast majority came from just a couple of states: Missouri, Kentucky, Virginia, and Maryland. Why? Because those are the states closest to free states. You don't have to go as far. And if you're in Alabama, the tragic, I mean, there's no end to tragedy when we're talking about slavery, but you don't have any map. There are no maps. You can't go to the exit. Well, today you can't go to a gas station and get a map anyway, but one used to be able to. You couldn't buy a map. There were no road signs. You didn't know how to get there, and so on. Plus, virtually every Southern community in a slave state maintains a force of people known as patrollers or one thing or another, whose entire job, paid at public expense, was to see that enslaved people didn't get out of town. So anyway, not to belabor this too much, but nonetheless, the Underground Railroad is delivering tens of thousands of people, maybe 100,000 altogether, into northern communities, mostly not Canada. You know, New York State, New England, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, all these states. And for the first time, white Northerners are encountering personally people who were enslaved. And it's becoming a personal, they're grasping it as a personal experience. And that the guy, you know, the former slave working on the next door farm is like you. Like you. I mean, you know, racism is always there, but nonetheless, white Northerners begin to identify with enslaved people and say, oh, children, family, parents, everybody's left behind. Oh my God, what this guy or this woman went through to get here, and so on. So it's helping to transform and radicalize a lot of white Northerners to the degree that they became willing to fight a war, which in 1850 they weren't willing to fight, by the way. You know, but in 1861 they do become willing. It's not a war against slavery initially, as we all know. It's a war to preserve the Union or to restore the Union, but it rapidly becomes a war against slavery within 2 years. Okay, and leads eventually to the recruitment of about 170,000 African Americans, soldiers and sailors, and so on. So, you know, when I was just driving here a little while ago, of course, I had to make a turn on Confederate Avenue and then up Sumter Avenue. Boy, it really encapsulates it, doesn't it? But happily I arrived here, we just,
The past is not past.
yeah, it's past isn't past.
Right now.
So, wasn't coincidental that Fort Sumter was in Charleston Harbor. Because South Carolina, as we talked about, had been fostering an idea of secession for 30 years. Okay, and had been incidentally a state leading the impulse towards secession in 1850. And accomplished it in 61. So, I mean, I'll be happy when we get to a Q&A to step back into this early pre-war, wartime period. But I think I want to get on to talking about the Klan, which is the main reason I'm here and you're here. Excuse me, I want to get a little water. Okay. This is a pretty recent book that I wrote. And I'm going to talk about the substance rather than not just the book, but what I wanted to do when I wrote about this was, one, to tell a story that is not well known, which is to say, yeah, I mean, everybody, if you say Ku Klux Klan, everybody has an idea. Everybody, you can fill in an image, as the band did in that clip we saw before. You put a guy in a white robe with a cone-shaped hat. You don't even have to say Klan, you know what it is. Okay. But the Klan is something that was invented. It didn't just come out of nowhere. And there were actually, as you may know, there were three Klans, three iterations, three versions of the Ku Klux Klan. Okay, we all, in fact, some of us at any rate, directly remember the one whose vestiges still exist today, being in the 50s as a reaction against the civil rights movement. But the first Klan was created systematically. It was planned. I'll tell you how in a couple of minutes. Okay, so I just to pick up where I left off, I was talking a little bit about the film Birth of a Nation, which inspired a refounding of the Ku Klux Klan in 1915. Unlike the original Klan, it was purely a profit-making operation that exploited nativism and racism to make money for its promoters. And it lasted through the 1920s when it collapsed in on itself because it was absolutely saturated with internal corruption. And it ended in personal, grotesque personal scandal, which, I don't want to get sidetracked into that now, but it ended, and it was reinvented again, really after World War II. I mean, there were a little spark here, a spark there in the 1940s, but the third Klan really was a third iteration.
There were bonfires here. There may have been sparks elsewhere, but when the 40s were ending, the statues from the Daughters of Confederacy covered Dixie like they do, especially here.
Yeah, yes, and not only here, but yeah, for sure. I mean, America was changing after World War II, and there were, the kind of people who were drawn to an organization like the Klan began to look back to what the last generation had done and kind of recreated it. But to come back to the original Klan, which is my main subject here, I wanted to show that organized terrorism has roots in American history. We tend to think of terrorism as something, I say we, I'm speaking very broadly, something happens in faraway countries and there's organizations with weird names and so on. And isn't it just terrible what's happening in fill in the blank? The Ku Klux Klan was homegrown. It's American. And it was the first organized terrorist movement in American history. And it's as much a part of our tradition, regrettably, as constitutionalism or the enlargement of democracy. Sadly, it has been a fundamental part of American history. Well, even though the original Klan has been overshadowed by the more recent examples. And why then? Well, in the years immediately after the Civil War, the United States was undergoing a racial revolution, which was real. I'm not speaking metaphorically. Robert, do we have maybe the either image of the South Carolina legislature? Maybe not. Anyway, I think maybe in a minute or two we'll have an image up here. Yeah, good. Thank you, Robert. I mean, here's an example, rather an image of the South Carolina State Legislature, and if you look carefully, there's a lot going on here, of course. You see the image of the State House. It's notional, actually. It wasn't actually done from life. And you see a Black gentleman on the left-hand side who is understood to be Robert Elliott, who was one of many talented, effective, articulate Black legislators who came in to state government, not just in South Carolina, but in virtually every former Confederate state. Do we have that other image as well, Robert? That was showing the photograph of member of that.
Give me 1 second. Please go
But if not, we can just go back to that one. So this was a revolution that was transforming former enslaved people into citizens, and that would overthrow the white oligarchies that had ruled the slave states since the founding. And as you probably know, or perhaps know, there was a gross disparity in the political weight that slave states wielded in the United States government, in Congress particularly, because states received a bonus number of representatives in the House of Representatives based on its enslaved population, famous 3/5 rule. That's to say, the point of it wasn't that an African American was 3/5 of a man. I mean, it's often said, but that wasn't really what that was about. It was that a state got a bonus of 3/5 more representation based on the number of slaves, which gave the South, near the beginning of the Republic, approximately 13 more seats than the population warranted in the House of Representatives, and closer to the Civil War, 21 more seats in the House of Representatives. And bear in mind also, which isn't often mentioned, that the populations of most slave states were much smaller than the populations of free state, industrializing free states in the North. So for every state gets 2 senators. Therefore, these very low population slave states had that many more senators as well. I'm not going to lead you too deep into the weeds with these numbers, but you get the point. So this revolution that was taking place after the war, this is the South Carolina radicals. These are the radicals, as they were called at the time, members of the South Carolina State Legislature. Many Black men. But also take note, a lot of those radicals are white people also. And it's telling you something about how much support there was at the beginning for biracial government. Forget about what personal attitudes members may have had. This was a a kind of a revolutionary movement within the structure, okay? And many white radicals, some of these are those people who used to be called carpetbaggers. I don't really like the term because it's a slur. I don't like the term scalawags either. It's another slur. Scalawags were native born whites who became Republicans or radicals, and carpetbaggers, those who came from the North. So it's quite a mixture. Some radicals were former Confederate soldiers who recognized that they had been exploited previously by the system, and they embraced emancipation. So there's a lot more diversity in the Republican Party, which is the left-wing party of that time, unlike certain, I might say that dare I say that. It's much more diverse, especially in the years right after the war than you might think. At any rate, Republicans, by and large, I'm talking about the National Party, believed that Reconstruction was irreversible. Read what they said at the time. They believed it was irreversible. It could not be rolled back. Okay. And most of them thought, they were delusional, I have to say, that Southerners, white Southerners, were going to acquiesce peacefully, not happily, but peacefully in the new reality. On the other hand, not many Southern Democrats, or dare I say, welcomed that revolution. And I'm going to quote he happens to be a Tennessean who was a wartime Unionist, who said in 1865, and remember this because this is part of what generates the Ku Klux Klan. This guy, but a Unionist, a wartime Unionist, said, quote, "The Negroes are no more free than they were 4 years ago. And if anyone goes about the country telling them that they are, shoot them." People said what they meant in those days. And okay, so as soon as the war was over, white resistance groups developed here and there, very fragmented, very scattered, different names, some of them odd names, white caps, pale faces, and so on. They were typically made up of former Confederate soldiers and men who before or during the war had been patrollers. And in some cases, really horrendous localized violence was perpetrated against former slaves as they began to assert themselves in freedom. And there were massacres, real massacres. I'm talking about big numbers of people in Memphis and New Orleans and a few other places. And nearly all these scattered groups were absorbed into the Ku Klux Klan. And as I said earlier, there's nothing mysterious about the Klan's origins. It was founded in 1866 in Pulaski, Tennessee, which is about 70 miles south of Nashville. Pleasant little town. You go there today, you know, typical town for that reason. A little town square with a big Confederate soldier on a pedestal in the middle of it. Pleasant place. And Robert, should we go to one of the Klan images? Doesn't matter, whatever you have there. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. And this speaks for itself. I don't think I need to explain this, but it started out, oddly enough, not as a terrorist organization or even a political organization. Its members, it was kind of a Confederate veterans fraternity. A bunch of young guys, half a dozen young guys who were veterans of the Confederate Army were bored. They were bored and they were sitting around trying to think up some way of entertaining themselves and having some fun. Okay. And at the beginning, they amused themselves by dressing in these outlandish outfits. And they weren't just all white sheets. Mostly that came later. It could be any kind of robes with funny, with fake horns coming out and cows' tails and all sorts of crazy costumes. And they would pop up in odd places around town, or around that county, actually, in Tennessee, often strumming banjos, you know. this is up to a certain point, a harmless, funky organization, kind of thing young guys might just get up to when they have nothing else to do. They were all university educated, by the way. Several of them were young lawyers. One of them was the town newspaper editor in Pulaski. And that is typical of the first Klan. The leadership was virtually all community leader types, very heavily educated people, not this kind of, dare I say, this stereotypical image of backwoods hooligan types with straws in their ears or something. At all. They were community leaders. They were often, as I said, editors, doctors, journalists, law enforcement people, very commonly, ministers of the gospel.
So middle class or upper middle class, highly educated.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the level of education varied, but many of them had college degrees.
But they weren't part of the oligarchy. They weren't
Well,
plantation owners. What's in it for them?
oh, okay, let's work our way to the answer to that. I think it'll become clear. But many of these men are in fact the sons of oligarchs. They're the sons of families that had owned some or a lot of slaves. And bear in mind, I mean, something that I think it's a basic truth that often gets lost when we talk about the history of slavery in the United States. It's very pertinent to this, which is that now those people who defend the Old South and so on will frequently say, well, most of them weren't slave owners who joined the Confederate Army and so on. Well, the truth is an awful lot of them were. And most of those who might not have slaves wanted slaves. It was aspirational. Owning slaves was the Southern version of the American dream for people it's for Northerners, it was typically a small business or a farm, your own land that you were going to work yourself. You might hire somebody, but you're going to work yourself. In the slave states, it was owning slaves. It was a dream, and so these young men were products of that culture. Whether or not they were in and of themselves from wealthy families, but many were. They were often the sons, younger brothers of plantation families, who were also educated. You know, look, not everybody was a PhD. I don't mean to imply, don't misunderstand me. But anyway, so as I said, this was a sort of funky outfit at the beginning, but by 1868, it had spread all over central Tennessee, and it was recognized pretty quickly by early 1867 by former Confederate officers who met in Nashville. And this is very well documented, met in Nashville, and they decided to co-opt these proliferating local groups, and because they saw the political potential in it. And I should have said earlier that one of the things that kind of became customary with these early versions of the Klan was entertaining themselves basically by messing up Black people. Not killing. It was not a killing organization at the beginning, but it was dressing up and scaring people. Bad enough. It was racial, obviously, but it wasn't the only thing going on. But the former Confederate officers saw that potential. The last thing they have in their heads, that image, let's say, of the South Carolina state legislature with all these Black faces and these radicals who are, for them, revolutionaries who are overthrowing this oligarchical system that had existed to some degree, varying degrees across the slave states. And they are, their goal is to, their word, by the way, redeem the states, the former slave states, to redeem them. It's got a kind of religious freight to it, as you can tell. Redeem it for the Democratic Party, the party of slavery in the South, for the Democratic Party, and for those who, even if they can't restore slavery as a legal institution, want the closest thing they can get to it. And which means, in large part, one, reducing liberated African Americans to something as close to slavery and political impotence as possible. And these are the goals. These are the goals. And to destroy, by the way, the corollary is to destroy the embryonic Republican Party. And I would get your heads here in the fact that the Republican Party is the progressive party in the South. And it's biracial. It is thoroughly biracial. And power is shared very widely between Black and white officials. And you may be thinking of state officers and so on. That's true enough as well, state legislature like the South Carolina one, but at every level. And there's much less government in 19th century America than there is today. I mean, there's not a lot of government, but what government there is mostly pretty local. It's county commissioners, county coroners, sheriffs, deputies, postmasters, a multitude of what today seem like small jobs, but that was government. And who's holding those jobs? Suddenly, a lot of people who were formerly enslaved are holding jobs like this, especially where the majority population is Black. And the sense of the world going mad among former slave owners, I mean, perhaps hauled into court for some infraction and facing town magistrate who used to be not just a slave, maybe his slave. And in order to understand what's going on, hard as it is, I think we have an obligation to try to imagine ourselves, not to sympathize with, but to imagine ourselves into the shoes of these guys and how easily it pushed them towards violence. Okay, they can't bear it. They can't bear it. Okay, so so anyway, this all started out as a kind of foolery. By 1868, late 67, it's not foolery anymore. This has become a paramilitary organization radiating out from Tennessee. It basically develops in central Tennessee, Nashville, that area. And it becomes basically the paramilitary arm of the Democratic Party. It embraces a systematic strategy of floggings and lynchings and shootings and torture and castrations and rapes. And anything you have read about some terrorist organization perpetrating in some other country was perpetrated by the Ku Klux Klan against Americans, mostly Black, but also white Republicans, by white Republicans who cooperated and collaborated and allied with African Americans. By the way, maybe I should say, at least parenthetically, that here I'm talking about the late 60s, and you might say, yeah, but weren't former slaves, African Americans, only empowered to vote by the 15th Amendment? Wasn't that in 1870? In the states could do whatever they want. And in the several years prior to that, states, including this one, were enfranchising Black voters. That is why state Republicans actually become the governing party across the South, not in every state, but close to every state, and are able to appoint or elect African Americans to this multitude of offices I referred to before. It's happening in the states before it became a federal law in 1870. And I think that's sometimes forgotten. But anyway, as time goes on, we're in 1868, 69 now. I mean, terror isn't a side effect. It is the MO, it's the modus operandi of the Ku Klux Klan. It is at the core of what the Klan does. It is a terrorist organization. It's not just kind of grumpy, disaffected, irritated whites, but it's, as I said, a paramilitary organization. And increasingly wherever it spreads, its goal is to draw a wedge between white and black Republicans by using racial appeals and terror. Okay. To destroy this embryonic two-party system in the South and restore white supremacy. And its victims, the Klan's victims, are usually the best educated and the most assertive and most outspoken black leaders. Surprise, you know. And it's one thing at the state level, state officials, there are in the state officials, members of the legislature who are murdered. Not so common, but it happened. The people who are most vulnerable are those who are living out in little communities and hamlets. These are rural states, hamlets who are vulnerable and unprotected, and can easily be either intimidated, or if they're not intimidated, killed. Okay. The Klan has a very it has a hierarchical structure. It's very organized. It has you know, so it had realms, a hierarchy of realms that matched states and that were divided into dominions that corresponded to congressional districts and provinces that were congruent with counties. And each dens tended to be 10 or a dozen men. Each den was supposed to produce quarterly reports, very bureaucratized actually, collect dues, obey the dictates of the Grand Wizard, and so on. In practice, however, especially from about 1868 on, the local dens received not very much direction from the nominal leaders in Tennessee, especially after the founding group actually dissolved in 68. And that has to do with Tennessee politics. And I don't think I could spend 20 minutes boring you with talking about Tennessee politics, but we'll pass that by. Dens mostly functioned as decentralized county organizations. That was kind of the manageable unit, with different dens, sometimes in different counties, occasionally different states, cooperating with each other when they wanted help. Okay, we don't know how many. Well, who is at the top of this pyramid? Robert, do we have Bedford Forrest here? Did we get him? If not, that's all right. Probably should have introduced you to him. Nathan Bedford Forrest, as you probably know, was one of the best known Confederate generals. He was arguably fairly brilliant cavalry officer. He was a pre-Civil War, a slave trader based in Memphis, a hugely successful, very, very wealthy slave trader based in Memphis. Made his fortune buying and selling men, women, and children. That he did. He became a Confederate officer. He was also a war criminal. He was responsible for the Fort Pillow Massacre in 1864, the worst war crime perpetrated. Again, here he is. The worst war crime perpetrated on American soil outside the Indian Wars, when a Union garrison in Tennessee, which was about 50% black, 50% white federal troops, was massacred. They were massacred. They were shot and they were tortured, and sometimes in terrible ways. And not surprisingly, he was recruited to become the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. He's widely associated with the Klan. That's not, I mean, it's not as if I'm telling you something that's not known. But it was not the founder of the Klan. I've already told you how it was founded. He was recruited because he was a great figurehead for the Klan. He was charismatic, he was ruthless, and he was also a skilled, as I said, cavalry officer. And basically what I think he did, he had two functions. One was to develop, to convert his hit and run style cavalry tactics from the war into post-war Ku Klux Klan hit and run tactics against unarmed civilians. Okay, that was one. And two, he was probably the individual who did the most to found individual clans and dens. They were called clans. His little one was called a clan across the South. He operated under the guise of representing an insurance company, which gave him cover for traveling everywhere. Virtually everywhere he went, a new clan would spring up and violence soon followed. Nobody knows how many members of the Klan there were. It's not really knowable. Forrest gave interviews and then he lied. He just lied. He lied. I mean, maybe not a shocker, but he was interrogated even by the U.S. Congress, by law enforcement, and I mean, he was very skillful. It may remind you of certain other people we find in public life, you know. When he was questioned by Congress, he claimed that there was no such organization as the Ku Klux Klan, maybe just some wild young men who were acting up. This was a standard line from Klansmen who were investigated. However, to a reporter, he also boasted that he could call up 50,000 armed men if he chose to. I think he was lying in both cases. I think the truth is somewhere. Well, the first was just a flat out lie. The 50,000 men, he pulled it out of the air. Some people in public life just make up facts, you know. You may not know any of that. Anyway, so in short, I think he taught the Klan how to wage guerrilla warfare. And as long as Andrew Johnson remained president, Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's vice president, after Lincoln's death, Johnson automatically becomes president. And Johnson, even though he was a staunch, tough unionist during the war, you know, give him credit where it's due, he was never a Republican. He was a ticket balancer. He was a Democrat, and he reverted to being a Southern Democrat after the war. And he had very, very little interest in enforcing legislation to protect Republicans and particularly African Americans after the war. And in this vacuum, the Klan flourished. It flourished. It expanded very rapidly, state to state to state. And as long as the federal government was passive, terrorism worked. And I'm going to quote somebody here, a guy named Robert Shand from Union County up here. Very interesting guy. He was a conservative local lawyer, very well-educated guy, and a Klansman, a Klan leader. And after a mass killing in Union County, he said, I'm quoting, "It was a gruesome sight to see the Negroes lying dead side by side in the grand jury room the next morning, but it had a most quieting effect on the other Negroes." This is a Klansman just writing matter-of-factly about terrorism. So wherever the Klan rode, the Republican Party hemorrhaged white members and the black vote plummeted. And the fact that as many African Americans continued to vote, and some whites as well, continued to vote, defying this danger, is extraordinary. These people are heroic in the history of American democracy, and much more ought to be known about them and written about them. There's plenty of information. It was just part of that history having to do with race that was just scrubbed out of the story for 100 odd years. Anyway, but nonetheless, Republicans still managed to cling to power in a lot of areas, partly because in some areas the population was so heavily Black that the Klan couldn't make any headway. I don't know, Beaufort in South Carolina, just to give an example, Black representatives continued to be elected from Beaufort up to the end of the 19th century, in spite of all this other stuff. And there were some other areas as well in Mississippi and a couple of other states. And so, but what's happening in the larger landscape here, and it's important to take this on board, that, and we're still in 1868, 1869 here. Little by little, because of changes in state laws and certain federal executive orders and so on, from Andrew Johnson, former Confederates here and there are seeping back into political life. And a few states are recaptured by Democrats in alliance with very conservative Republicans who are willing to sell out African-American voters in order to regain power. The Democratic Party itself flatly rejects Reconstruction. This kind of racial revolution that we're talking about here. But at the same time, in the North, pressure for reconciliation with the South is steadily growing. Voters, including Republicans, are just getting tired of the South's problems. After 450,000, very possibly 550,000 Union dead in the Civil War, touched every family, every community. People don't want conflict anymore. They don't want, it's kind of a natural human phenomenon here. After almost every war, people just want to shut down. And this isn't everybody, but it's a trend. It's a trend in the North. And radicals still dominate in Congress, very significant, but there are more and more splits in Republican ranks. And okay, let me say a word or two about the Army, because it comes into play here. There were 1 million federal troops under arms in July of 1865, right after the end of major hostilities in the Civil War. By 1868, there are 13,000. So when you scattered all over the country, 13,000. So when you hear apologists for the enemies of Reconstruction and apologists for the kind of post-Confederate Jim Crow era, and say, well, the South was under military occupation. What military occupation? What military? It's 13,000, and a third of those are in Texas, facing west toward Indian country. And you had a few hundred. I think there were I used to know the numbers here for Columbia. They were minuscule. There might be a few dozen in a state capital or a railroad junction. Some states had fewer than 100 federal troops left. So there was no military occupation. Okay, it's in this atmosphere that Ulysses Grant is elected president in 1868, takes office in 69. As you doubtless know, until fairly recently, he was regarded to be in the lowest tier of the least competent American presidents. And when he, like many other people, both Black and white, was in a sense a target or a target of the ideology of Jim Crow, which is to say, erase, and the abolitionist movement, Black and white, erase anybody who worked towards the empowerment of African Americans and bridging the racial divide. So when you look at Grant through a lens of civil rights and racial politics, he's unquestionably one of the best presidents of all. Were there shortcomings in his administration? Sure, there were. Yes, there were. He trusted too many people who were not entirely honest, but it's not an administration just saturated with dishonesty and corruption. And you know, even today, you'll hear that said. It's not true. It's not true. Did it exist? Yes, it did. Was there corruption in Reconstruction state governments? Shocker. Yes, there was. Of course there was. This is America in the 1870s, you know. Anybody ever hear of Tammany Hall? You know? Like my maternal ancestors were Tammany Hall, Irish Tammany Hall pals in New York. So no, not the Bordewichs. It was no, the Madigans. But be that as it may. So Grant was never an abolitionist. His father was an abolitionist, and in fact had been a business partner with John Brown. So you know something right there about the kind of home that Grant was raised in. He himself was not particularly political as a younger man. Went to West Point. The army, the military was very conservative politically, heavily oriented to the Democratic Party and so on. But what Grant had was an instinct for racial fairness. Racial fairness, that may not sound like a grand thing, but it was profound, actually. And the war in particular changed him. It made him a radical, essentially. He saw right from the beginning that it was going to destroy slavery. He protected fugitive slaves who came into his troops' camps. Other federal officers, still thinking in terms of the fugitive slave law, the 1850s, sent them back to their masters. I mean, there were of course other abolitionist generals, but Grant notably protected fugitive slaves, refused to send them back, and gave them work in his camps. And he also welcomed Black troops into his armies, unlike some other Union generals, notably William T. Sherman, who was, you know, of course, burned this, who, let's say, permitted this city to be burned. Not true that he lit the match, so to speak. Sherman absolutely would not tolerate Black troops. He was a deep racist, sad to say. Grant was not. Anyway, so gradually Grant becomes a radical as he's watching the fruits of the Union victory slipping away through the government, slipping away from the government during the early Reconstruction, the Johnson years. He wholeheartedly supported the 14th Amendment. And in 1870, he put his personal prestige on the line to win congressional support for the 15th Amendment. He believed in it. He also appointed the first Black ambassadors to Haiti and Liberia. And he abolished segregation among visitors to the White House. Doesn't sound like much today. Maybe it was a big deal in 1860, 69, 1870. So Grant immediately is inundated with letters from victims of the Ku Klux Klan. And I invite you to, in a library, certainly in the university library here, you can read Grant's letters, collected papers. They're terrific. They're absolutely fascinating. If you read them from this period of his presidency, you can read hundreds literally of letters written by Klan victims who were writing personally. People did that in the 19th century. You know, they considered public officials much closer to them than people do today. You know, write a letter to the White House today, see what happens. No, okay. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of the flavor of what's coming to Grant in his inbox. And several of these are from South Carolina. The last active Republican office holder in a county is reported shot dead only a few yards from where his predecessor had been murdered. And the guy writing to Grant says, I know I'm going to be next. A postmaster begged Grant for protection. He wrote, should I be murdered hereafter, I ask of your excellency the arrest and punishment of those men. If it were known that I had even written such a letter to you, I would be murdered instantaneously. And another man is writing that there had been 26 murders in the surrounding area where he lived in just a few months. And he wrote, Kansas people are protected from Indian massacres. Why cannot we be protected against Ku Klux outlaws? And when Klansmen couldn't find the men they were after, they typically took vengeance on wives and daughters, children. And I'm going to give you one example. It's from South Carolina. It's from York County. There are so many like this, but two. Okay. In one example, a woman was spat on and almost blinded by raiders who made her cook them a meal, then dragged her into the road and raped her. Another example, Klansmen shot Amzi Rainey's small daughter, 9-year-old girl, then gang raped another girl in front of Rainey's other children. And it goes on and on. I mean, I was challenged by how much of this graphic stuff to include in the book that I wrote. I felt it was my duty to include enough that you knew exactly what was going on and not pull punches. Now, that it was this bad. It was worse than what I just read to you, by the way. You know, on the other hand, if you overwrite this sort of thing, it becomes kind of pornographic. And so it was challenging. It's challenging to write about. Okay. By the way, this is an opportunity for me to show you, but this is something else you can get. I mean, you can download this, by the way. Okay. I'll refer to it later on, but I sometimes you know, when I'm talking like this, I forget to mention it. Okay. The federal government under Grant, this is, which I'll say, talked about in a couple of minutes, launched an investigation of the Ku Klux Klan. The Joint Committee, Congressional Committee, which included both Republicans and Democrats, by the way. So it was a very, very balanced committee, with the Republicans had an edge because they had a majority, produced 13 volumes of investigation of the Ku Klux Klan, and 13,000 pages, okay? The subcommittees visited nearly all the former Confederate states. This is one of 3 volumes from South Carolina. 3 volumes. And this is volume, happens to be volume 2, and it's only up to page 1269. Okay. And what it is packed with testimony. The entire investigation packed with first-person, real-time testimony from victims of the Ku Klux Klan and perpetrators. Nathan Bedford Forrest was called in, and they interviewed him, and you know, he lied. But nonetheless, you get to encounter those people too. How did they communicate? What did they say? What did they claim they were doing or not doing? And the committees interviewed people all across the spectrum. All across. It was the very first congressional investigation, to my knowledge, ever that included testimony from African Americans. Also, to my knowledge, the first that included testimony from women. Lots of women, lots of Black people, from all kinds of backgrounds, and there are, it's very detailed. Now, I will say, you can download this, by the way.
Oh, we have those proposed at the Modjeska School deeper dive for today. The trial transcripts
Yeah.
are posted, we have the congressional hearings to post. And we also have really remarkable contemporaneous reports from local newspapers.
Great. But you also have this, the condition of, yeah, I recommend this. It's, though, as you can perhaps see, the typeface is pretty small, so be prepared. You know, I for about 2 years of chronic headache from reading. But anyway, it's very, very rich material that takes you right into the middle of this period and into the presence of, as I said, victims, perpetrators, government officials, soldiers, everybody, apologists, criminals, murderers, you know. And yeah, I mean, it's got statistics, all kinds of things
I
here.
found that it made the story so much more impactful and believable because you're reading these things that sound like they could be said today, but it was 100 years ago, but the same kind of stuff is happening. And their excuses or their support for their position, it sounds current.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, much of the testimony, and some of it is absolutely wrenching. It is 160 years old. It's a teeny weeny type, and it is wrenching. I sometimes I just can't. I got to get up and walk around for a while. It's too hard to read some of this stuff. And I mean, there are some people were murdered on their way home from testifying. You'll have people sometimes, including somebody I'm thinking of who came here to Columbia. There were hearings in
The
Columbia.
trials were in Columbia and Charleston, and they went on for 2 years.
Though the hearings took place everywhere.
Well, the hearings everywhere, the congressional hearings were everywhere.
Yeah.
But what happened in South Carolina also happened in Southwide, but it was,
Sure.
the intense area was here.
Yes. And people talk about, I mean, I'm thinking of one guy in particular, that he walked 40 miles. Worked 40 miles to give testimony. He didn't have any money, couldn't hire couldn't ride. He walked 40 miles and he said, I want to be heard. And you hear this anyway. So, okay, how are we doing on time here? Oh,
We've got another 40 minutes of schedule time.
okay,
Go for a little more longer and open it up for questions.
it's fine. Okay, we're getting there. So anyway, what did Grant do? What did Grant do? He essentially declared war against the Klan. I mean, it wasn't literally a declaration of war, but it was in essence a declaration of war. And it involved the army, federal detectives who penetrated the Klan, newly energized federal prosecutors and federal judges and ordinary citizens, including those who took their lives in their hands, often to sit on juries to try members of the Klan who were arrested. And the President Grant turned the 14th Amendment into a he set out to enforce the 14th Amendment. It's one thing for Congress to enact a law. It's another to see that it's enforced. And this is where the rubber meets the road in terms of dealing, say, with this terrorist movement. Or, I mean, frankly, we can see today we have a president who doesn't want to enforce law. He doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to do it. So the challenge of enforcement is today as immediate and real as it was in 1870 and 71 and 72. The 14th Amendment, of course, extended citizenship to free people and guaranteed the protection of life, liberty, and property. And for victims of Klan, they've not been protected. Grant determines, he says, what tools do I have to protect them? And initially, he's very careful. He was accused at the time of Caesarism. That's a tyranny, of dictatorship. by dictating and military rule in the South, but he's actually extremely careful to get congressional legislation that will enable him to act. It's very far from dictation, nothing like that. No wild executive orders saying, oh, do this, do that, do the other thing. It's not how he operated. He roots his actions in legislation. And he got 3 laws passed in succession. They're called Enforcement Act or Force Acts, sometimes the Ku Klux Klan Act. Okay, same thing. And it empowered him to use troops to protect the rights guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. And just for example, these acts said that anybody found on a public road in any disguise with intent to cause injury or to terrify, frighten could be charged with a felony. And the law declared as federal crimes, and this is significant that they were federal crimes, crossing state lines with intent to terrorize, joining any secret organization that committed a person to swear to commit or conceal an act of terror, or attempting to rescue someone jailed for an act of terror. Punishments were really severe, up to $10,000, which is a huge amount of money in the 1870s, and 20 years in prison. And also, the law gave the president the authority to suspend habeas corpus, where he believed that the public safety required it. And that brings us to South Carolina, because this is the only state in which grants suspended habeas corpus for 9 counties, 9 counties north of here. I've got a list of them tucked away somewhere, but I think
I have no sure.
you have it too. Okay. But at any rate, 9 counties. Why here? Why then? Because this there you go. Okay, thank you very much. This region of South Carolina was an epicenter of Klan activity. There are others, it's not that are similar, but this is arguably the densest, the area most densely saturated with Klan activity at the period, in this period, 1870, 71, and into 72. The Klan has essentially taken over these counties. Now, where there are still Republicans in office, they are under constant threat. And I should say, by the way, here, that the idea that the federal government had a duty to protect civil rights was brand new. Nobody had done it before. No president had done it. Americans didn't even expect it before, insofar as there were rights defined in the what we now call the Bill of Rights. It wasn't really until the 20th century that Bill of Rights became a common term, but not to get into that. That insofar as there were any authorities expected to enforce the freedoms in the Bill of Rights, it was assumed that the states could do it, and only the states, not the federal government. The 14th Amendment, as understood during the Grant administration, was that the federal government, for the first time, not only could and would enforce them. So this is extremely forward-looking and radical. That interpretation was essentially overthrown by the Supreme Court a few years later, in the 1870s and 80s. And I don't know that we're going to have time to get into that. But during this period, the civil rights can be enforced and are enforced the way we understand them, that they should be enforced today. But it was novel then. Anyway, and Grant put his own reputation, his prestige as president on the line, went up to the Capitol and said, I want these laws. I want them. I need them. I need to take action. And he set out to break the Klan here. And let's, Robert, could we get Merrill up here? I'm going to show you a guy whom we should all I wish we all knew who this guy was. This man was a hero of Reconstruction. Okay. Colonel Lewis Merrill, actually, he was major when he was here in South Carolina, after becoming a colonel later. He's a young guy. He was a rare abolitionist in the upper ranks of the Army. West Point trained. He was also a lawyer. He had fought Confederate guerrillas in Missouri during the war. And he was extremely determined. He was absolutely the best person who Grant could have picked to take on the Klan, because he dealt with guerrillas already. He was absolutely fearless. He was a lawyer. He did not break the law. He was not a military, swaggering military type at all. He was kind of an intellectual. And I read his reports up in the National Archives in Washington. They're fabulous. He was a good writer. He's a good writer. Amazingly, there's a lot of this in my book. He was very, very trenchant and had an unusual understanding of the psychology in an era before psychology, what was treated as a sphere of knowledge. But he had great insight, psychological insight into people who joined the Klan, which he writes about. So at any rate, he's got all these pieces, and he is a major in a hard fighting unit, which is dispatched down here to pull back from the frontier, from the Western frontier, to come to South Carolina. And this is the 7th Cavalry. And, I'm sure many or all of you know that the 7th Cavalry was George Armstrong Custer's regiment, which would be largely destroyed in the Battle of the Little Bighorn a few years later. And indeed, some of the soldiers who are carrying on this righteous war against the Klan are men who are going to die out in Montana a couple of years later. Merrill did not die at the Little Bighorn. He was on leave at that time, by 1876.
Was he in Columbia during the arrest?
He was based in Yorkville. He came to Columbia. He gave copious testimony in the South Carolina trials. Copious testimony. A lot of the intelligence that had been gathered against Klansmen who were tried in Columbia was gathered by Merrill. It's his material. He's sitting there. With the prosecutor in Columbia, here in Columbia. There was nobody who understood better what the criminal nature of the Klan was, but I'm going to tell you very quickly, at least, what he did. It's quite interesting. So he came down here with the 7th Cavalry, and he was absolutely committed to making Reconstruction work. And he gathered intelligence from freed people who were eager to help, and he recruited turncoat Klansmen as spies, and he arrested Klansmen by the hundreds, about 800 in York County. 800. He estimated that 60% of the adult, and he means teenage on, white males in York County were members of the Ku Klux Klan. And it's quite interesting. Of course, freed people were only too willing to help him, and they're under threat by the Klan. But how this worked, he writes about this, and it's quite interesting. People come to him in his camp at night, usually, with information. And it turns out that, the population in York County at that time was just almost equally divided between black and white. Obviously, or not surprisingly, I should say, black people are working for the white people on farms, in town, and the people who were Klansmen or had been slave owners before the war had such a low regard for African Americans, they didn't pay any attention to what they were saying around them. So, I mean, it's quite interesting, actually. But the working folks, black working folks, were absorbing everything and then going and giving all this information to Merrill. And so he learns everything. you know, who are the members, who are the leaders, where are they meeting, what are they planning to do? So he has this brilliant intelligence network operating, and pretty quickly, in the course of several months, he begins breaking Klansmen from the bottom up, from the least loyal, the most, let's say, vulnerable. The Klan has forced men into the Klan who did not actually want to join the Klan. They were coerced, they were threatened, because the aim was to basically recruit all the white people, white men in the county. So there are people who really want to way out, not a lot, but enough. So Merrill puts all this intelligence together, and I mean it's in Merrill testifies here also in the Joint Committee's reports. It's on there. Anyway, in all, in South Carolina, about 5,000 men are indicted. 5,000 in this one state. And by 1872, 73, the Klan has been broken here. The Klan has been broken. Even Frederick Douglass declared, and this is very interesting. Douglass declared in 72, I believe, the scourging and slaughter of our people have so far ceased. So Frederick Douglass perceived it. So I'm not being glib by saying Grant destroyed the Klan, Merrill destroyed the Klan. Robert, should we go to Amos Ackerman? And then I think I probably should begin wrapping this up. So there were two components to Grant's war against the Klan. This is a contemporary colorization. Obviously, there were no color photographs in 1870. But there was the military component, which I just talked about, and I probably didn't say that Merrill's men are arresting Klansmen. They are turning up at Klansmen's homes, and they're dragging them out and arresting them and throwing them in jail in Yorkville or down here in Columbia. And they have hundreds of guys. They have so many, they don't know what to do with them. Whole clans are coming in. They're caving. They're caving in. They're informing on each other. They don't know where all the informers are. The last thing they think is that they're mostly Black people. But at any rate, so these hundreds and thousands, there's also the judicial side of the campaign against the Klan. This is Amos Ackerman, who was Grant's Attorney General. The Justice Department was created in large part to pursue the Ku Klux Klan. There had been attorneys general since the 1790s, but they served as the president's lawyer, which is what our current president thinks the attorney general is supposed to be, but it's a throwback, obviously. Ackerman is a very interesting guy. He was born in New Hampshire. He was educated in New Hampshire, and then he came to Georgia initially to teach, and then, well, actually, he became a lawyer in Georgia, and he eventually owns a few slaves. He was a Whig politically. He was never a Democrat, but he became essentially an adoptive Southerner, and he was not very happily kind of not drafted, but persuaded to become a Confederate officer. But he was a supply officer, never a combat officer. He wasn't happy about it, but after the war, he almost immediately became a Republican. He embraced emancipation. Obviously the people whom he'd enslaved were freed, and he became an advocate for African Americans. He was a deeply religious guy, and he saw the moral dimension of slavery. He wrote about it. Regrettably, he didn't leave a huge body of papers, but he did write some, and he's very, very trenchant, a very sensitive guy. I mean, you might say, well, how could a slave owner be sensitive? Well, people are complicated. People are full of contradictions, you know. And he was plucked from Georgia. He was very active in the Republican Party in Georgia. Grant plucked him to join the cabinet, and he was put in charge of carrying on the legal campaign against the Klan. and he was fierce. He also moved to Yorkville. He moved to Yorkville, which became the command center for the campaign. And he was working in partnership with Merrill and communicating directly with Grant. Okay, so I've kind of, maybe I've sort of hinted, not very clearly, I guess, at what the problem was. Well, so then what happened? Did all these evildoers get sent to federal prison, and that was the last we ever heard of them? Well, not. No.
Surely a president didn't pardon them.
Okay.
I've seen this movie, it doesn't turn out well.
Well, a lot were arrested. Many men spent weeks, months in some kind of custody, including up in Yorkville, here in Columbia, across the South, and so on. However, what's happening in Washington has some bearing here, that Congress declined to appropriate the money to fully enforce the force acts. Okay. As I said earlier, there's people have become tired of the South's problems, conflict in the South. I've already said this. So the laws were great, and you had great leadership. You had Grant, Ackerman, Merrill, and there are people like them elsewhere. But enforcement depended on one, the military. Congress is not appropriating enough money for all the troops that are needed. They don't want too many members of Congress, do not want a new war in the South. One. And second, the Justice Department has a total of 55 assistant district attorneys to cover the entire United States. Only 16 of them are in the former Confederacy. 16. It costs, I've got a figure here. Yeah, it costs a fortune actually to try for the federal government to carry on a trial. In South Carolina, it took more than a month to try just 5 men, and it cost the government $200 an hour in 1871. Multiply that many times over. And Congress is not appropriating the money. This is the non-sexy part of governing, where the money, how do you pay for it? How do you pay for it? Do you pay for it? If you can't pay for it, it don't happen. It just doesn't happen. So there's increasing pressure, incidentally, to pull the troops out of the South and send them to the Dakotas and Montana and Texas. And eventually they are pulled out, not right away. Merrill is down here for 2 years. And that money is never appropriated for the prosecutors. And in 1874, and this is the real pivotal year in the end of Reconstruction. It's 1874, it's not 1876. What happened in 1874 was that the Democrats won control of the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is where money bills originate. If you don't have the money, you can't do it. And I could bore you for an hour on how this plays out in Congress. I've written about it elsewhere as well. The money just isn't there. And once Democrats are in the saddle, including many former Confederates, because there's been enabling legislation and that enable them to rejoin, to be reelected to political office. Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy, is in Congress. And others. I mention him because you know his name. So, and I also mentioned, but I won't dwell on this, that over a course of several decisions spanning about a decade, the Supreme Court reinterprets the 14th Amendment as no longer to permit the federal government to enforce civil rights under it. The Supreme Court is now dominated, beginning in the 70s, essentially by lawyers, men who were corporate lawyers. And they think of the 14th Amendment. I'm not going to get into this, it's very complicated. But basically as applying to business and no longer civil rights. So what happens to the enforcement of rights? Well, the court rules it's really, as it had been previously, the responsibility of the states. Well, who's running the former Confederate states by this point? As you do know, 1876, you have a counter-revolution in South Carolina. You have one in Louisiana as well. These are the last states to be governed, however tenuously, by radical Republicans and biracial state government. It ends. That does end in 1877, the spring of 1877. They don't come back. They don't come back into office. As you know, here we are today. But so that the federal government, even under Grant, no longer has the authority to enforce laws, which he wants to enforce. They can't do it, and the money has been stripped away, and the soldiers sent to the Dakotas. Okay, so if Grant, I think, from our perspective, standing here today, we can't rewrite history. There are people who want to rewrite history. We can't, and none of us can rewrite it the way we'd like it. Even those who try can't do it. Now, if the Klan War had been given the proper political and financial backing, it could have ensured ongoing protection for Black Southerners and for the survival of a two-party system in the South. Of course it could. Of course it could. This isn't rocket science. In a sense, Reconstruction was defeated in the North, not only by terrorism in the South, which it was, of course, terrorism. Even when the Klan was defeated, it didn't mean the terrorism went away. It changed. And then once white redeemer governments, state governments were in power, they could legislate an end to Black enfranchisement and so on and so on. You know this. The abandonment of Reconstruction is obviously a national tragedy, and we're still trying to undo the consequences of that tragedy today. Literally today, right now in the country as we see it, as we breathe and here on March 30th, 2025. So what do we take away from this? Is there any good news here? Well, yes and no. On one hand, the history of the Klan War shines light into the country's tortured inheritance of racial injustice and the challenges of containing domestic violence, domestic terrorism. We know that hasn't entirely gone away. The Proud Boys, 3%ers, they're here. They're going away. Multitude of militias with all kinds of nutty names, just like the proto-Klan groups of the 1860s, scattered around the United States. They haven't gone away, and it's still, some office holders, some governors recognize this and they're trying to deal with it, and some don't. But the story also does show that with determination and commitment, and that commitment may involve money, it's possible for courageous politics to prevail over extremism. It's possible. It's not impossible. And it's one of these cases where it behooves us, I think, to learn from what our forebears were not able to do. This isn't a polemic about the present day. You can draw your own conclusions. Probably pretty obvious where I stand on this. we can't afford to not know this history. We can't afford to not know it. I mean, it is a scandal to try to scrub it again out of our memories and out of textbooks just think we don't need to remember this. I think we should be grown-ups already. I mean, what I'm saying now is something I say, frankly, to more conservative audiences who need to hear this. And I speak to audiences who are, kind of Civil War interest or broader, kind of broad history interest. And I mean, I don't say anything different than what I just said, but I underscore that we're grown-ups now. This is 2025. We don't need to fake our history. We just don't need to do this, and it doesn't matter what your great grandpa did. I mean, I was a crooked politician in New York. I mean, okay, okay. I mean, I find it more interesting than I find embarrassing at this point, I think we need to act as a nation, as culture, like grown-ups who can face the truth, and then let's just at least know it. We can argue about a lot of stuff, but we have no business anymore pretending that the past didn't happen. Thank you.
And it's time for some question and answers. There is a question already in the chat from Cecil, which I think ties back to what you just said, as a matter of fact. He asked, do you believe the advent of the internet, social media, etc., constitutes a fourth era of the Ku Klux Klan? And what about the current administration being the nation beginnings of a fifth?
Well, okay. I'm not a person personally. I don't care too much how we label it. Okay. I mean, the Klan in its three iterations has a very specific history. Okay. It's a very specific organization, although in three different, this similar form, but three different times. And I personally don't think it's helpful to mislabel things that may be happening in our present. I mean, it's bad enough. I mean, it's a challenge. Let's say challenging enough. Now, I don't think the proliferation of deception or disinformation, misinformation, flat out lies. That's not actually new, although it's turbocharged by the internet. Because newspapers were the internet of the 19th century. Everybody read newspapers or had newspapers read to them, and there was just as much misinformation, disinformation, spin, and so on in newspapers in the 19th century. And it's a sad fact, I think, that human beings are often swayed by things that aren't true. Okay. There are organizations, which I did mention, like the Proud Boys and so on. Yeah, I mean, these are, they were polo shirts and chinos, and instead of white robes, but yeah, pretty much the same sort of thing. And the administration, I think, is so warped and seat of the pants and rooted so much in opportunism and ignorance. I think it's a different thing from the Klan, although clearly it's not above nurturing organizations that are like
Absolutely. I have a couple of questions. Before we get to the questions in here, there were two folks who raised their hands on Zoom. I want to get to them very briefly. First, Taisha, and then Elizabeth. Taisha, go ahead, please.
Hello, sir. Thank you for the lesson. Just my question, when you mentioned Democrats and Republicans, I know that Black people seem to be caught in the middle of Democrats and Republicans. They always said that the Democrats were always against us. But do you think that all Republicans did like Black people and that there were no Republicans that were part of the Ku Klux Klan back in those days? Thank you.
Thanks. Well, I mean, the Klan particularly targeted Republicans, and it's very common in the extant literature, some examples of which I referred to, that men, both Black and white, dragged from their homes and with guns pointed at their heads and saying, "How did you vote? How did you vote? And how are you going to vote in the next election?" And the Klan explicitly is attacking the Republican Party. So I don't think there were any men who were willing members of the Klan. Certainly there were individuals who were reluctantly forced into the Klan. And yes, that did happen. You know, you might think, well, how could they make somebody do something he didn't want to do? Well, with a gun to his head. I mean, literally, I don't mean a metaphorical gun, I mean a real gun. And those were individuals who tended to come in and confess as soon as they felt safe that they could do that. So I think it's perfectly clear, again, it's very well documented, that the Klan in the period that I'm talking about was the paramilitary arm of the Democratic Party. There was no liberal wing of the Democratic Party in the South. In fact, no, I can't say there was one in the North either at the time. It just didn't exist, because the Democratic Party was essentially the Confederate Party or the post-Confederate Party. And yeah, there were Republicans who, for pragmatic or opportunistic reasons, defected to the Democrats politically, but there's really no evidence of Republican, ordinary folks who were Republicans becoming Klansmen and still being Republican.
Thank you, Fergus. Shorter answers, more questions.
Okay.
All right, Elizabeth, go next, please. Unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, there we go. Hey, I just wanted to get your opinion about something I've recently stumbled on. My work is in looking at how the Jim Crow carceral state was built, and what really has surprised me, but when you think about it, it shouldn't, is how many Klan leaders folded into law enforcement. And they continued the tactics of terror. Due process was not something that they really understood. So Robert Paxton, the historian of fascism, European fascism, says that in his opinion, the first appearance of fascism in the West was through the Klan in Reconstruction. And, you know, that just sort of really made so much sense to me, because if you look at the continuities of the law enforcement atrocities that went on in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, they're coming out of places like Lawrence and Union and York, where you have these incredible mobilizations of citizens, National Guard, and law enforcement with machine guns and gas and, you know, hand grenades in the search for one person, you know, who's alleged to have done something. It's usually a Black man. And so I'm just interested in your thoughts about that, because I see Jim Crow as a fascist regime, and we don't talk about it that way. So thank you.
I totally agree. You expressed it perfectly.
All right, and of course, today there's no relationship between law enforcement and the Klan. Okay, so next question, put it please, sir, in the back.
I came here tonight from the library, just down the street, and there was a panel having a discussion, and there were 5 African Americans, 2 young ladies and 3 young men. One of the young ladies is from this school, and there was a young gentleman there, looked like he might have been 19 years old, white guy, touting the facts that Donald Trump is a Christian and the best president. So it seems to me that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And a lot of it may start with white people. So you all have a responsibility to talk to young people, to let them know that our history cannot be whitewashed or rewritten unless it's at our peril. As a Black man, I don't want anything anyone has except what I have. And so it's not about me trying to take anything from anyone. And I would imagine there are a lot of people like that, like me, that just want to live. Okay, I'm a preacher, so it's Sunday. You're going to get the sermon. Romans 13:1 says, to owe no man anything except to love him. John 13:34-35 says, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another as I have loved you. By this they shall know that you are my disciples, if you have love one towards another. I don't see Donald Trump in any of those examples. I don't see Elon Musk or Doge or any. We got to do better. We got to be, like you said, grown-ups about this. And if you all don't get your young people on board with accurate, true history, I think this next thing that I'm going to ask you is going to happen. So how close do you think we are to violence in this country?
Okay, well, January 6th. Look, violence never really goes away in this country. It is a violent country historically. There is no country on earth that is gunned up, not gummed, but gunned up as the United States. I mean, in fact, as soon as I live in Washington, D.C., and you get below a certain point. I mean, you see billboards for guns all over the place, and gun shop. I mean, it exists elsewhere, but it's really striking. I think it's always possible, and certainly the current leadership has nurtured the idea that may be a reasonable response to what upsets you. I mean, it's pretty distressing, frankly. But
it came really close.
I think January 6th was. I mean, not only that, but it jumps out because it was the U.S. Capitol.
If he pardons Chauvin, I'm telling you.
Sorry, say again.
James, your observation about reaching the youth is one of the purposes of the Modjeska School, so we'll continue talking about that.
We can't get there fast enough for me. Because I love people, I love God, I want the world to be better. And
Jumping off
That's why we're all here.
James's point and even Elizabeth's point, when we talk about fascism and also talking about youth, one of the tenets of fascism, I wouldn't even say tenet, but where it starts with even a singular person is it starts with a thought process of I am right and you are wrong, no matter if the statement they're making is true. So getting out there with accurate information and speaking to people, especially young people, especially with this wave of podcasters and everybody else who thinks that their opinion is the most important opinion or that it's correct, which opinion is an opinion, not a fact. But it's so important to educate people and use education as empowerment, I think, because of so much misinformation and disinformation. And if you watched Trump's joint address back in March, earlier this month, or February, whenever it was, but he makes these statements where I am correct and nobody else is wrong. And that's one of the biggest battles we're fighting in all of this is right versus wrong.
I told him he wasn't a Christian.
He's not.
All right, so we're almost out of time. So let me go to Dr. Goldman first, and our question in the back, and then we'll wrap up there.
Greetings. I want to thank you so much for this presentation. I have authorized Brett to buy your book on my behalf, and I'm in the process of doing a family history, and it is the history of South Carolina from the perspective of my family, which brings me to the whole idea of historiography. And I think it's very, very important for me to mention that as good as your presentation was, it was a presentation from a white perspective. And I'm not sure, I've looked through the so-called slave narratives, And many of those folk were scared, and it comes out obvious. So I'm looking at trying to find people like Martin Delaney, who actually wrote during that period of time. Um, in terms of the idea of violence, the United States has been at war for 222 years of its existence, officially at war. So this country was born in violence, bred in violence, and continues to be violent. But again, thank you so much for this presentation. I can't wait to get your book.
Thank you.
All right, and I will add very quickly to Dr. Gallman's point about that. I love Klan War. I think the work that goes well with it is I Saw Death Coming, like Dr. Williams.
Yes.
I Saw Death Coming is a history reconstruction from a grassroots Black perspective.
Yep.
I'll put it in the chat in just a moment. Yes, sir, in the back. Let's go ahead.
Kind of surprisingly relevant question it turned out. My question was this: people in South Carolina pretend that they have this like bravado and this a chance to resist any form of tyranny. Do we, like, looking back at this time period in this war against the Klan, is there a local resistance to the actions taken by the Klan that we see?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's much more to be said than I had the time to say. But I mean, there's resistance, both Black and white, and it's both at times physical. There was Black militia, formal state militia that was led by Black Americans in South Carolina. There's much to be said about that. There isn't time. It was very problematic politically whether to use it or not. Okay. There was tremendous anxiety in the state government here, whether if Black militia was used, there would be an out and out bloodbath throughout the state. I'm just telling you what was said at the time. And Black state leaders were part of that dialogue and discussion. Bear in mind that even where there was Black militia, these were farmers. Klansmen, by and large, were Confederate veterans, battle-trained veterans, and absolutely ruthless, and which I couldn't underscore that sufficiently. And in instances where there was a confrontation, the militias didn't come off so well, regrettably, and it was a problem. There was political resistance. I mean, there were plenty of tough Republicans, both white and Black, in the state. Some of them quite heroic, I would say. I mean, it took a lot of guts, particularly, I'm thinking, during any election for Republicans, Black or white, to say campaign in Edgefield, which they did publicly in Edgefield, and it got worse and worse and worse and more dangerous as the years went on. There's much to be said about it. I do write about that quite a bit in my book, but it was insufficient to deal with the degree of danger. I wanted to add one comment in response to Elizabeth. Okay, I don't know if she's still here, but and a number of people have talked about the fascist dimension. I totally agree, by the way, with that. However, I also would add to that I think it would benefit us, I mean, broadly speaking, to begin to think of the antebellum South, the slave regime, as a totalitarian system, which it was for all but those who benefited from it. And it is the things that were controlled were exactly what were controlled in modern 20th century totalitarian systems. So I think there's a lot of room for people to do, I would say, more thinking, writing, and publishing in that area.
All right, there is one final question in the chat, and I'm going to ask it because it's from Vernon Burton, who has joined us this afternoon. Vernon, he asked, even without long prison terms, etc., do you think President Grant and the trials broke the Ku Klux Klan in South Carolina?
Yes. Yes, I do. Did South Carolina thereafter become a peaceful, humane, politically cooperative and kumbaya singing city? No. But did it break the Klan? Yes.
All right. And to find out what happens after the Klan was broken will be tomorrow night's class for the Justice Simkins School of Human Rights. So again, let's give a Bordewich a round of applause. And at 6:30, we have Dr. Goldman's African history lecture on Zoom.
And people on a Zoom out there that aren't in the Midlands, or that you're here, All Good Books ordered a bunch of these books for us. They're selling them for $20. And Steve, it's allgoodbookssc.com.
It's, yeah, all good books.
Allgoodbookssc.com.
No, it's allgoodbooks.com.
All Good Books.
Yes, allgoodbooks.com.
No SC.
No, that's
Allgoodbooks.com. Yeah, you can put that in the chat. So you can order your book there.
all right. And again, we'll see many of you tomorrow. And again, tomorrow evening will be the era post-Reconstruction up until 895. Surprisingly, a lot happens at this date in those 20 years. So we'll see you tomorrow night.